The massive doors of the Galactic Academy of Sciences opened with a soft hiss. Tom Smith took a deep breath, adjusting the environmental suit that kept him alive in the alien atmosphere. His heart beat faster as he walked into the grand entrance hall, where floating crystals provided soft, rainbow-colored light. The other students moved away as he passed. Some floated, others crawled, and a few rolled like living balls of light. Tom heard their whispers, a mix of different universal translators trying to keep up with various alien languages. A Deathworlder. From Earth. How did it even pass the entrance exam? I heard they still use combustion engines. Tom kept his head high, though his stomach turned with nerves. He had earned his place here, passing tests that most humans would find impossible. The Academy had to create special questions for him, since he couldn't process five-dimensional math like the other students. The classroom door recognized his student ID and slid open. Inside, the room looked like a mix between a concert hall and a science lab. Floating platforms served as desks, each adjusted to the unique biology of its student. Tom found his desk, the only solid, non-floating one in the room, marked with the universal symbol for dangerous species. Professor Gray entered the room, his crystalline body casting prismatic patterns across the walls. The ancient teacher had been educating young minds since before humans had discovered electricity. His crystal segments shifted as he moved to the front of the class, a sign that Tom had learned meant the equivalent of clearing one's throat. Students of the Advanced Physics and Weapons Theory class, Professor Gray's voice resonated through the room. Today marks a historic moment. For the first time in our institution's 50,000 years, we have accepted a student from a death world. All eyes, sensory organs, and various detection appendages turned toward Tom. He sat straighter in his chair, trying to look confident. Tom Smith of Earth, Professor Gray continued, has been admitted under the Galactic Education Equality Act. While his species is still considered primitive by our standards, the Council believes in giving opportunities to all sentient races. A blob-like student in the back made a sound like bubbling liquid, their version of a laugh. Others joined in, creating a cacophony of alien amusement. Professor Gray raised a crystalline appendage for silence. However, being from a high-gravity, high-oxygen world has its advantages. Mr. Smith's species has evolved to survive conditions that would kill most of us instantly. This is why he must wear that containment suit, to protect us from his naturally toxic biology. Tom wanted to explain that his suit was actually protecting him from them, but he kept quiet. Let them think what they wanted. For our first major project, Professor Gray's voice took on a tone of academic excitement. We will be designing theoretical weapon systems. Each student will present their design in one standard month. The project will count for 60% of your final grade. The professor's crystal segments shifted to focus directly on Tom. Mr. Smith, given your species' limited understanding of advanced physics, you will be restricted to using only principles known to Earth science. We wouldn't want to overwhelm you with concepts your kind hasn't discovered yet. More alien laughter filled the room. Tom gripped his desk's edges, feeling the strong Earth-normal gravity underneath him. The only space in the room adjusted to his needs. He had expected this kind of treatment, but it still stung. As the class continued, Tom took careful notes. Professor Gray explained the project parameters, occasionally making examples of primitive technologies that even humans had surpassed centuries ago. But Tom didn't mind. With each condescending remark, each dismissive wave of a crystalline appendage, his determination grew stronger. They thought Earth science was simple, primitive, fine. He would show them just how dangerous simple could be. After all, there was a reason they called his home a death world. Tom smiled to himself as he began sketching his first ideas. Sometimes, the most basic principles could be the most deadly, especially when everyone else was too advanced to see them coming. The Academy's library stretched endlessly in all directions, with data crystals floating in perfect geometric patterns. Tom sat at his reinforced desk, surrounded by holographic displays showing Earth physics textbooks. He had been there for hours, flipping through pages about simple machines, pendulums, and wave mechanics. Still studying the basics, Deathworlder. A voice like chiming bells came from above. It was Ray, a student made of pure energy contained within a force field. How quaint. Tom ignored the comment and continued reading. On the screen before him, a diagram of a simple pendulum swung back and forth. Something about it caught his attention, but he couldn't quite figure out what. Professor Gray's instructions echoed in his mind from that morning's class. Your weapon designs must follow standard safety protocols. Energy-based weapons must include containment fields. Matter-based weapons require disposal plans. And for our primitive student, please try to keep the explosions to a minimum. The class had laughed, as usual. Tom had watched his classmates already beginning their designs. Ray was working on a quantum displacement cannon. Another student, a floating cloud of gas named Mist, was designing a plasma vortex generator. Even the smallest projects involved technology that wouldn't exist on Earth for centuries. Hey, Earth thing, Mist floated over, its gaseous form swirling with amusement. Want to see something really advanced? The gas cloud projected a complex diagram into the air. This is a basic quantum mechanics problem we learn as children. Maybe in a few hundred years, your species will understand it too. Tom studied the diagram. Surprisingly, it reminded him of something he'd learned in high school physics, the double pendulum problem. Chaos theory. His eyes widened as an idea began to form. Thanks, he said, smiling at Mist. You've actually been very helpful. Confused by his response, Mist drifted away, muttering something about primitive brains and simple reactions. Tom pulled up more Earth physics books. Resonance frequency, harmonic motion, synchronized oscillation. The concepts were basic, yes, but they were also fundamental. Universal. Even advanced alien materials had to follow these rules. He remembered a story about soldiers marching across a bridge, how they had to break step to prevent resonance from destroying the structure. What if? Mr. Smith, Professor Gray's crystalline form, appeared suddenly beside his desk. I trust you're not attempting anything too ambitious. Tom quickly minimized his screens. No, sir. Just studying simple Earth physics as required. The professor's crystal segments shifted in what Tom had learned was their version of a condescending smile. Good. We wouldn't want you to strain yourself with advanced concepts. After all, your species still thinks gravity is a force rather than a dimensional preference. As Professor Gray glided away, Tom reopened his research. He began making calculations, converting Earth measurements to galactic standard units. The numbers were promising. Very promising. That evening, in his reinforced dorm room, Tom sat surrounded by paper notes. Actual physical paper, which his classmates found horrifyingly primitive. But paper couldn't be hacked, couldn't be remotely viewed, and most importantly, couldn't be understood by the Academy's advanced AI systems. He sketched diagram after diagram, each one simpler than the last. The weapon he was designing wasn't complex. It didn't need to be. Nature had already created the perfect weapon, mathematics itself. The same principles that governed a child's swing set also governed the movement of galaxies. Tom held up his final sketch, a design so basic it looked like it belonged in a children's science book. But hidden within those simple lines was something deadly, something no advanced species would think to defend against. Sometimes, he whispered to himself, the most dangerous things are the ones you think you've outgrown. He glanced at his environmental suit hanging by the door, a constant reminder that humans were considered too dangerous to walk freely among other species. They thought humans were primitive because they evolved on a death world. But they never stopped to ask what that really meant. They were about to learn. Late at night in the Academy's physics lab, Tom sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by simple pendulums he had built from string and metal weights. His environmental suit hummed softly as it filtered the alien atmosphere. The room's artificial gravity had been set to Earth normal, making it the only place besides his room where he could work comfortably. He watched the pendulum swing, each moving at a slightly different rate. Something about their movement nagged at his mind. The way they synchronized occasionally, then fell out of sync again. "Computer," he called out, "show me the crystalline structure of Professor Gray's species again." A hologram appeared, displaying the complex but orderly arrangement of living crystals. Tom had been studying it for days, trying to understand how such beings could exist. The crystals vibrated at specific frequencies, allowing consciousness to emerge from seemingly lifeless matter. As he watched the hologram, one of his pendulums knocked against another, setting off a chain reaction. The sudden chaos of swinging weights caught his attention. He looked up at the crystal structure, then back at the pendulums. His eyes widened. "That's it," he whispered. "Computer, record this observation. When multiple pendulums interact, they can create complex patterns of constructive and destructive interference, just like waves. Just like." He quickly grabbed his paper notebook. The other students still found his use of physical writing materials absurdly primitive. His pencil flew across the page as he sketched wave patterns and mathematical formulas. "Computer, what's the resonant frequency of standard crystalline architecture used in academy buildings?" "Processing." The AI paused. "Warning. This information is restricted for safety purposes." Tom smiled. If it was restricted for safety reasons, he was on the right track. He didn't need the exact numbers anyway. He could figure it out through experimentation. He set up more pendulums, arranging them in a precise pattern. Each one was carefully measured and weighted. To anyone watching, it would look like a simple physics experiment, the kind of thing human children might do in school. "Primitive," a familiar voice called out. Ray floated into the lab, his energy form pulsing with amusement, still playing with strings and weights. "My quantum displacement cannon is nearly complete. It can tear holes in reality itself." Tom quickly covered his notes. "Just trying to understand the basics," he said innocently. "You know how far behind humans are." Ray's energy field flickered in what passed for laughter. "Well, don't hurt yourself trying to comprehend simple harmonic motion. Some species just aren't meant for advanced physics." As Ray left, Tom looked at his pendulums again. The aliens were so focused on quantum mechanics and energy weapons that they'd forgotten something crucial. Everything in the universe, no matter how advanced, still followed the basic laws of physics. He spent the next few hours adjusting his setup, measuring the interaction between swinging weights. When multiple pendulums swung at just the right frequencies, they created powerful resonance patterns. The same patterns he had noticed in the crystalline structures of the Academy's buildings, and in Professor Gray himself. Tom remembered an old Earth story about an opera singer breaking a wine glass with just her voice. The principle was simple: hit something at its resonant frequency with enough power, and it would shatter. But he wasn't interested in breaking glasses. His calculation showed something far more interesting. With the right arrangement of simple pendulums, he could create a cascading resonance effect. Each swing would build on the last, amplifying the force exponentially. The best part, it was all based on classical physics. No quantum mechanics, no plasma fields, no reality-tearing technology. Just simple, elegant, deadly mathematics. Tom gathered his notes and carefully dismantled his experiment. As he packed away the pendulums, he patted his notebook with satisfaction. Inside were calculations that could potentially bring the mighty Academy to its knees, all based on physics so basic that his advanced classmates had dismissed it as irrelevant. Sometimes, he muttered to himself, the most powerful weapons are the ones everyone thinks they've outgrown. The Academy's testing chamber was eerily quiet at midnight. Tom had chosen this time carefully. Most species of the Academy were diurnal, and the few nocturnal ones avoided the dangerous humans' usual working spaces. He placed his device in the center of the room. It looked deceptively simple, a series of weighted pendulums arranged in a precise pattern. connected to a small control unit he built from spare parts. Nothing about it suggested advanced technology. Nothing about it would raise any alarms. Computer, activate safety protocols for testing chamber 4, Tom commanded, double-checking his environmental suit's seals. And begin recording data. Safety protocols engaged, the computer responded. Warning: unauthorized testing may result in academic penalties. Tom smiled. This is just a basic physics experiment. Nothing unauthorized about studying simple harmonic motion. He placed a small crystal, similar in composition to the Academy's structural materials, on a pedestal 20 feet away. The crystal was a common building material, something so ordinary that nobody had questioned him taking a sample from the materials lab. Test 1. Tom spoke into his personal recorder. Starting with low-frequency oscillation, he activated the device. The pendulums began to swing, each moving at a slightly different rate. To an observer, it would look random, chaotic even. But Tom knew better. Each swing was precisely calculated, creating overlapping waves of force. At first, nothing happened. The crystal sat motionless on its pedestal. Then, almost too faint to see, it began to vibrate. Frequency matching confirmed, Tom muttered, making notes. Increasing power by 10%. The pendulums swung faster, their movements creating patterns in the air. The crystal's vibration became visible, a slight tremor that grew stronger with each passing second. Suddenly, a hairline crack appeared in the crystal surface. Tom quickly shut off his device. He walked over to examine the crystal, heart pounding with excitement. The crack was small but deep, proof that his theory worked. Computer, analyze structural integrity of test crystal. Crystal structure compromised by 23.4%. The computer reported. Cause: resonant frequency interference. Tom carefully documented everything, using his primitive paper notebook. He knew the computer's records could be accessed by others, but nobody at the Academy would think to look at physical notes. As he worked, he heard voices in the hallway. Quickly, he packed up his equipment, leaving only the cracked crystal as evidence of his test. Professor Gray glided into the room just as Tom finished hiding his device. Mr. Smith, the crystalline being's voice resonated with suspicion. What brings you to the testing chamber at this hour? Extra credit work, Professor, Tom replied calmly. I'm having trouble understanding some basic concepts. You know how primitive human education is. The professor's crystal segments shifted as he examined the cracked crystal on the pedestal. And this? Failed experiment, Tom shrugged. I was trying to understand how crystal structures respond to different forces. Obviously, I still had a lot to learn. Professor Gray made a sound like tinkling glass, his species' version of a dismissive laugh. Indeed. Perhaps you should stick to even simpler concepts. We wouldn't want you to damage any more Academy property with your experiments. After the professor left, Tom let out a long breath. He looked at his hidden device, then at his notes. The test had exceeded his expectations. If a small prototype could crack a crystal from 20 feet away, a properly tuned full-size version could. He stopped that line of thought. Better not to write down everything. Better to let them keep underestimating him. Back in his room, Tom refined his calculations. The weapon design was nearly complete, but he needed one more thing. A way to control the resonance pattern at a larger scale. The answer, he knew, would lie in the same basic physics that had gotten him this far. Just a few more tests, he whispered to himself. Then we'll see who's really primitive. The Academy's main presentation hall buzzed with excitement. Floating screens displayed complex weapon designs while students made last-minute adjustments to their projects. Tom sat quietly in his reinforced chair, his simple device hidden in a plain metal box beside him. Professor Gray's crystalline form glittered under the hall's bright lights as he called the class to order. Today, we will witness the future of weapons technology. Each of you will demonstrate your theoretical designs, and we will evaluate their potential impact on galactic defense systems. The professor's crystal segments shifted towards Tom. We'll start with our more advanced students to set a proper standard. Ray floated to the center of the hall, his energy form pulsing with confidence. Behold, my quantum displacement cannon. A massive device materialized from his energy field, its surface covered in swirling patterns of light. This weapon, Ray announced proudly, tears holes in the fabric of reality itself. Observe. He activated the cannon, and a small section of empty space began to twist and fold. A target drone disappeared into the distortion, emerging as scattered atoms. The class erupted in appreciative murmurs. Professor Gray's crystals chimed with approval. Excellent use of quantum mechanics, Ray. A true example of advanced thinking. Next came Mist, the gaseous student. Their weapon was a plasma vortex generator that created miniature stars and controlled their collapse. The demonstration left scorch marks on the reinforced walls of the hall. Remarkable, Professor Gray commented. The power to harness stellar forces. This is what true weapons development looks like. One by one, the other students presented their projects. A gravity manipulation field that could crush ships into singularities. A time dilation beam that aged targets into dust. A consciousness transfer ray that could empty a person's mind. Each demonstration grew more spectacular than the last. Tom watched carefully, noting how every weapon relied on advanced technology. Technology that would fail if its underlying systems were disrupted. And now, Professor Gray's voice carried a note of amusement. Let us see what our primitive friend has created. Mr. Smith, please try not to damage anything with your Earth physics. Laughter rippled through the hall. Ray's energy form flickered with mirth. Did you bring a chemical explosion, Deathworlder? Perhaps a simple projectile weapon. Tom stood slowly, picking up his metal box. His environmental suit hummed softly as he walked to the presentation area. The other students moved away, their standard safety protocols warning them about his dangerous biology. My device is rather basic, Tom began, opening the box. As required, I only use principles known to Earth science. He removed his creation, the array of pendulums, now refined and precisely tuned. The class stared in confusion. Even Professor Gray's crystalline form seemed to vibrate with suppressed laughter. Is that string and metal weights? Mist swirled in disbelief. You spent a month designing a children's toy. Tom arranged the pendulums carefully. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most elegant. This device demonstrates harmonic resonance and wave interference patterns. Wave interference. Ray's energy field pulsed with amusement. While we're manipulating quantum fields and creating artificial stars, you're playing with waves. Professor Gray moved closer, crystal segments shifting in what Tom had learned was their equivalent of a condescending smile. Well, Mr. Smith, please proceed with your demonstration. Though I must warn you, if this is an attempt at humor, it will affect your final grade. Tom checked his calculations one last time. Everything was perfectly aligned. He looked at his classmates' advanced weapons, their quantum fields, plasma vortexes, and reality warping devices, all of them built on technologies so advanced they'd forgotten about the basic forces that govern the universe itself. Don't worry, Professor, Tom said quietly, reaching for the activation switch. This is no joke. Tom stood calmly beside his device as the laughter of his classmates echoed through the presentation hall. His hand rested on the activation switch, fingers steady despite the tension in the air. Before I begin, he said, voice clear and confident, I should mention that this demonstration will be brief. I recommend everyone maintain a safe distance. More laughter. Ray's energy form pulsed with amusement. Safe distance. From string and metal. Oh, the deadly pendulums might swing at us. Professor Gray's crystalline form shimmered with what passed for a smile in his species. Mr. Smith, while we appreciate your safety concerns, I doubt your primitive device requires such precautions. Tom nodded politely. As you wish, Professor. He pressed the switch. The pendulums began to swing. At first, their movement seemed random, chaotic even. Several students openly snickered, but Tom watched Professor Gray carefully, counting under his breath. 3 seconds passed. The professor's crystal segments shifted slightly. 5 seconds. A faint vibration began to travel through the floor. 7 seconds. Professor Gray's form shuddered almost imperceptibly. What is this? The professor's voice wavered, his crystal segments trembling. I feel strange. The pendulums swung faster now, their patterns creating invisible waves that rippled through the air. The crystalline walls of the presentation hall began to hum with a deep, resonant frequency. Simple harmonic motion, Tom explained calmly. Every object has a natural frequency at which it vibrates. Find that frequency, amplify it correctly, and a sharp crack echoed through the hall. One of Professor Gray's smaller crystal segments had developed a hairline fracture. Panic erupted. Ray's energy form flickered wildly as he tried to power up his quantum displacement cannon. But the rippling waves from Tom's device were affecting the cannon's delicate calibration, making it sputter and fail. Mist tried to activate their plasma vortex generator, but the harmonics disrupted the containment fields. Other students rushed to their weapons, only to find that the resonant frequencies were interfering with their advanced technology. Stop this at once, Professor Gray commanded, his voice cracking like stressed glass. More fractures were appearing across his crystal surface. This is impossible. Mere vibrations can't they? Tom increased the power slightly. Every advanced material in this room, including your own body, Professor, is made of crystalline structures that can be shattered by the right frequency. This isn't advanced technology. It's basic physics. The same principles that let an opera singer break a wine glass. The professor's form was vibrating violently now, small crystal shards falling to the floor. Deactivate your device immediately. Of course, Tom replied, switching off the pendulums. The vibrations slowly faded. Professor Gray's form stabilized, though the fractures remained visible. That was only 30% power, by the way. At full strength, this primitive device could bring down the entire academy. Silence filled the hall. The students stared at Tom's simple array of pendulums with new understanding and fear. Their advanced weapons, now recovering from the harmonic disruption, seemed suddenly less impressive. Ray's energy form had dimmed considerably. But it's just string and metal. How could it defeat our quantum technology? Because Tom began collecting his equipment, carefully storing each pendulum. You forgot about the basics. You were so focused on bending reality that you ignored the fundamental laws that govern it. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. Professor Gray, still trembling slightly, raised a fractured crystal segment. Mr. Smith, I believe we may need to revise our understanding of primitive physics. Tom closed his metal box with a soft click. That was the point of the demonstration, Professor. Never underestimate the basics, or the species that remember how to use them. 1 week after the demonstration, Tom sat in Professor Gray's office. The crystalline being had mostly healed, though faint lines still showed where the fractures had been. The office looked different now. All the floating crystal decorations had been carefully removed. Mr. Smith, Professor Gray began, his voice carrying a new tone of respect. The Academy Board has reviewed your weapon design. They found it disturbing. Tom waited quietly, his environmental suit humming in the silence. Disturbing, the professor continued, because it exploits a weakness we never considered, one that exists in nearly every advanced structure in galactic society. The crystal segments shifted uncomfortably. We've become so focused on quantum mechanics and energy manipulation that we forgot about the fundamental forces that govern our universe. Basic physics doesn't stop working just because we discover new things, Tom said softly. The same principles that make a child's swing move can shatter a crystal or disrupt a plasma field. Professor Gray's form shimmered in what Tom now recognized as thoughtful consideration. The board has offered you a research position. They want you to help develop defenses against resonant frequency weapons. And my grade for the project. A sound like tinkling crystal chimes filled the room. Professor Gray's laugh, but different from his usual condescending tone. Highest marks, of course. Though I must admit, you taught us far more than we taught you. The door chimed, and Ray floated in, his energy form pulsing with subdued colors. Tom, do you have a moment? Come in, Ray, Professor Gray said. I believe you have something to say to your classmate. Ray's energy field flickered nervously. That is, the class was wondering if you would teach us about Earth physics. Not the primitive stuff we thought it was, but the real principles. The ones we overlooked. Tom smiled. What about your quantum displacement cannon? It's impressive, yes, Ray admitted, but it failed completely when faced with simple harmonic resonance. Perhaps there's value in understanding the basics before moving to advanced applications. Professor Gray moved to his desk, crystal segments aligning formally. This brings me to another matter, Mr. Smith. The Academy is revising its curriculum. Starting next term, all students will be required to study what we previously called primitive physics. We'd like you to help develop the course. Tom leaned back in his reinforced chair. I'd be honored, Professor. Though I suggest we start with pendulums. They're surprisingly educational. Indeed. Professor Gray's tone carried a hint of irony. We'll also be revising our classification of earth sciences. The term primitive will no longer be used. Simple does not mean ineffective, as you've so dramatically demonstrated. As Tom left the office, he found Mist waiting outside. The gaseous student swirled respectfully. Your device. It shouldn't have worked against my plasma vortex generator. But the resonance patterns disrupted the containment fields like they weren't even there. That's the beauty of basic physics, Tom explained. It doesn't care about how advanced your technology is. Gravity, resonance, momentum, they affect everything equally. Walking through the academy halls, Tom noticed the changes his demonstration had caused. The floating crystal decorations were gone, replaced by more stable materials. Students who once avoided him now asked questions about earth science. His primitive notebook had become an object of fascination. In the main hall, a new display had been installed. Inside a protective case sat a simple pendulum, its steady swing marking time as it had for centuries on Earth. Below it, a plaque read, "Sometimes the most profound principles are also the simplest." Earth proverb. Tom smiled behind his environmental suit's faceplate. He'd come to the academy expecting to learn advanced alien physics. Instead, he'd taught the galaxy's brightest minds a lesson about respecting the basics. After all, a Deathworlder's most dangerous weapon isn't strength or speed or advanced technology. It's the wisdom to remember that the simplest solutions are often the most powerful.